Good afternoon, everyone. This is Michael Cullen, and I'm here with Camille Denat from the CRG Global Initiative. It's great to see you online. This is our second webinar on the Fair Financing Toolkit, and this one focuses on the equity budget analysis dimension of Toolkit. What we will do now is that we'll have a brief introduction of the toolkit itself and the process around it. Then we'll move on and have a case presentation from Cambodia, and also hear from our colleagues in Eastern and Southern Africa at the Regional and Multi-Country Program Unit. We'll have an opportunity to have questions and answers, and finally we'll hear about the learning tool. Now, just a few words of advice before we start. Even though we hope that the connection works splendidly today, there might be issues when we change the slides. So it would be very good if you could have the presentation that's been emailed to you open while we talk. When we change slide, we will let you know, and we will say the number that we are at. In our first test, we had some issues with the changing of slide. So please just have the presentation open next to you as we go through this. And after the case presentation, we'll have an opportunity for questions and answers. But if you have questions in the meantime, you are welcome to post them in the chat box. Camille will help me in moderating the chat box and collecting questions. So please have them there, and we'll call to you if we need you to explain a bit further. I see there's still a few people joining us, and that is just great. But let us begin with the webinar itself. The Fair Financing Toolkit was developed in 2016 and presented for piloting in 2017. There are currently, we're now on slide 3, by the way. There are 4 pilots taking place in Zimbabwe, Tanzania, Rwanda, and through the Isaro Regional Multi-Country Program Unit. Cambodia, who is invited to do part of the presentation today, it's not part of the piloting, but their work have inspired many elements in the toolkit, and have over the last months taken important steps in testing the equity budget analysis. So when we invite them on board, it is also to hear about their experiences, even though they're not part of the official piloting. I'm now on slide 4. As I mentioned briefly before, we will have a short introduction, then Cambodia and the Isaro office, Q&A session, and then the learning tool. And after that, we'll do a wrap-up. I think we've already been over this. Next slide, slide 5. Now, this quote is from the Addis Ababa Action Agenda. Our work on equity budget analysis draws on national, regional, and international commitments to children. But in the work we do with equity budget analysis, the focus is strongly on how domestic resources are prioritized and invested. We can say that all elements of the Fair Financing Toolkit builds on the same commitments to children, but we look at different perspectives. So if we move to the next slide, we can see that equity budget analysis built a lot on the first pillar, the increased national and international revenues collected and spent equitably. In the webinar on Monday, we heard more about the cost barriers to services, and we also worked jointly on the minimum financial security for all children. Good. Let's move on. Next slide. Okay, we have a few questions on the slide numbers. It seems that we might be stuck on slide 22. We are now on page 8, or slide 8 of the slideshow. Okay, I see we're stuck on page 22. Maybe we can just restart the presentation.
Hi, all. It's Italy. We have reloaded the presentation. Can you confirm if you see now slide 8 on your screens? Okay, perfect. I will take that as a quorum. Yes. Thank you.
Good. Sorry for that. The purpose of the toolkit is to enable CSOs and sector and colleagues to measure the equity of budgets and to use the findings in advocacy. Now, equity budget analysis builds on more traditional budget analysis, but takes specific action to include social outcome data and analyze this together with public finance data. So we're adding an element onto the more traditional budget analysis. What we're trying to do is to combine the what of budget analysis. What are the resources available and how are they spent, with the who are benefiting from the investments. So we're adding a new dimension to traditional budget analysis. And of course, we look to how we can use our analysis in advocacy, campaigning and programming. We are now on slide 9. Focusing on the who in budgets can be challenging because budgets are structured around the what. So in equity budget analysis, we try to combine the social outcome data. That can be, for example, education statistics or health statistics with public finance data. We'll talk more about what constitutes public finance data and social outcome data in the following slides. But the essential part of equity budget analysis is that we combine the sources to investigate how public resources are prioritized and address or compound inequity. Now we work with the accountability chain. Equity budget analysis works on improving transparency, strengthening participation, and promoting accountability. While a lot of the work can be set on to be on transparency by providing insight, it's also structured in a way to strengthen the participation and engagement with both duty bearers and right holders, and finally to promote accountability. Just a bit more on where we stem from. Now, equity budgets build particularly on the UNCLC and aims to have governments undertake deliberate effort to make sure that the most deprived and excluded children and their families are prioritized in planning and budgeting for them to access services and enjoy their rights outlined in UNCLC and its optional protocols. So we have highlighted 3 words here: deliberate effort, most deprived, and prioritized. Now, in order to keep governments accountable for this, we need to see who the most deprived are and how we can prioritize them in budgeting. We also have the word deliberate effort. This is not just about allocating resources broadly to all kinds of society or to all parts of society, but trying to target those investments to those most deprived. As mentioned, we work a lot on the transparency element. We do that through establishing systems for monitoring public budgets and linking those to social outcomes. Availability of data is a continuous challenge. Often only partial data is available. For example, enacted budgets can be available, but reports on actual expenditure are not, or the data is only available very late. Furthermore, the data is rarely available in a format that allows for easy capturing. Much of the information we see are in PDF files, and we also quite often see it in local language, which is not easy for persons like myself to capture. And we even sometimes see that the tables are handwritten, which also brings issues of maybe you're sitting with a bad photocopy of financial data that you have to capture. Also, in that regard, there can be quality concerns, both in regards to the numbers included. When we compute them and try to calculate, we find ourselves wondering, can this really be right? Is this a typo? And where it seems that basic quality control can be lacking in the data that we see. We also note that something like the chart of accounts that structures public finance data can change over the years or between regions with little or no explanation. Equally, in social outcome data, we can have concerns about the quality of the data. Is it accurate? And does it follow a similar and comparable structure from year to year? One of the key points that often transpire from this kind of work is that, or any review of public finance and social outcome data, is that availability and quality of documentation should be improved. We're now on slide 12. On the participation element, it includes mobilizing CSOs and engaging with duty bearers. While this can be challenging, SC are often members of platforms and working groups that are well positioned to engage with government. Generally, we try to engage in a constructive and inclusive way, where we, rather than criticizing government, engage governments early and involve government counterparts in our work. We should also consider to prepare government before we disseminate data. Now, this is about having an inclusive dialogue. And I think Sobiak, when he presents on Cambodia, will also talk about how we reach out and work with governments here. When we work with governments, it's also about improving accountability. We engage in a dialogue, we try to be constructive and be able to make rapid analysis of, for example, budget proposals and social outcome data. These are just some of the key concepts. I use the word public finance data. We would often also refer to that to budget documents. This relates to all sorts of public documents around public finances. We often focus on the enacted budget, as the budget adopted by Parliament, and the budget implementation reports, or the expenditure side. Relevant public finance data should be obtained at both national and subnational level. This means in order to really break down the data, we want to look at both national level, but also what are the subnational levels doing. In Cambodia, they're called provinces. Other places there might be counties, but there is often some sort of subnational level that we can look at. And we also include the functional classifications, that is, for example, the sectors, education, health, social protection, and the economic classification, the salaries, the operational costs, capital. We might also be able to draw on something like program-based budgets where they are available, but it depends a lot about the structure and the quality of the data. Social outcome data, by this we mean any sort of public statistics on social outcomes. For example, national education statistics, national health statistics, if there are official documentation on child protection or poverty. They have to be regularly updated. It has to be something that we can measure towards public finance data. So published on a yearly basis so we can see how things change or develop over time. And they have to be broadly recognized and wide enough in scope to link to budget documents. That means that it's difficult for us to use social outcome data that focuses only on a certain part of the country. It has to more or less follow the structure of the budget document, so we can break it down by provinces or by communes or by counties. In the equity budget analysis, we try to combine these two and see what that gives us. When we conduct equity budget analysis, partnerships are very important. We're in an area that transcends our thematic structure. We're working on child rights governance combined with education, combined with health. We include meal colleagues and advocacy colleagues. So we try to have a very broad approach, but we also need to work with a number of CSOs that work both on local and national level. We reach out to other INGOs and work with multilateral and bilateral partners and government as needed. So we can have some very wide and very diverse platforms or corporations that we engage in. Platforms can be particularly useful if they're formed and effective, but those can be good options to engage in this kind of work. We are now on slide 15. So just to say something about the analysis that we might conduct. When we look at the functional level, we look at changes in allocations to the different sectors. For example, education and health. When we look at how has their budget allocations changed over time. We can also look at the recurrent and capital, where recurrent are the day-to-day costs like salaries and operational costs, and how much is invested in, say, new buildings or new infrastructure. Another area of interest can be the credibility. Credibility relates to whether government is able to implement the budget as planned. So are they actually spending the money on what they have set in the enacted budget? Many of the countries where we work, we find that credibility is poor. Maybe 30% of the resources are spent outside of what was decided in the budget. We look at the area of comprehensiveness. Comprehensiveness relates to what is included in the budget. And in many situations, a lot of state activities are outside the budget. Sometimes it can be the military or security that is not part of the budget. It can also be state-owned enterprises. We might also see that capital investments or that infrastructure loans from development partners are outside, or maybe internally generated funds, for example, user fees at universities or for licenses of any kind are outside of the budget. So how much is actually included in the budget? We look at the economic perspective, so changes in, for example, salaries compared to operational cost and capital investment. And sometimes we also look at the revenue or tax side, where we try to look at what is the composition of revenue, for example, between progressive and regressive taxes. Now, these are options, and these are also things that we have looked in more traditional budget analysis. When we look at social outcome documents, the first one that we've mentioned here is the child rights situational analysis. Now, ideally, that should give us a very good indication of where we want to focus our work. So who are the most deprived, why are they deprived, and how can we set a focus on their conditions and resources allocated to address inequity. So we should be able to use the child rights situational analysis to do that. Also in social outcome data, we look for data that is separated by geography, based on a subnational structure. We look at sectors such as education, health and nutrition. It could also be child protection data, but something that is structured in a way that we can combine it with public finance data. We also look at gender. Now, gender separated data is a challenge in our work. Sometimes we find that gender separated data is not available, or the way that it's structured makes it very difficult to conduct continuous analysis. So it's something that we're aware of, but that is often difficult to address. We also find ourselves reviewing legal frameworks. In this kind of work, it can be, for example, formulas for allocating resources to subnational levels. There's often some sort of model saying that the subnational level should have at least 5% or 10% of the revenue. There can also be policy instruments such as an education capitation grant, where for each student enrolled in primary education, there's a grant that follows that student. So we will also reach out and look at, say, more the legal framework or policies behind it. However, we often find ourselves looking at secondary data. So we look at documents published by other sources that we compute and combine. We try to combine to also use primary data. I think the excellent presentation we had on Monday on the cost barriers shows a way of collecting primary data. So it's something that we want to improve our ability to do, to include the primary data. Key informant interviews, particularly with commune clerks, with budget officials who have an in-depth knowledge about how the data is structured. That can be very useful when we try to do equity budget analysis. Now, the kind of analysis that we do when we have our public finance data and we have our social outcome data and have reviewed the legal documents and spoken to key informants is that we try to compare data over time. Now, I think we do that in all sorts of work, but that is to try to understand trends and changes over time. We look at neighbors. So how is this country performing compared to other countries? And how is this region performing compared to other regions or the other subnational levels? We use issues such as range and ratio. I think Cambodia will show us more about that. And also ranking. Just a simple ranking saying how are resources being allocated between different provinces. Sometimes it's good to have to look at what are the best performers and what are the worst performers doing, to try to identify what characterizes their performance. We use techniques such as mean and median calculations, and we look at standard deviations or the coefficient of variations. This tells us something about how diverse data is. And we can also use the Gini coefficient. Now, these are just to mention some of the tools that are mentioned in the toolkit, or some of the methods for analysis. What kind of analysis we can do depends strongly on what data is available. It's rarely about the mathematical qualifications that we need here. It's about the availability of data. So one observation point is that it's good to start simple and build on strengths. Now, we always require access to data. This is not a given. It is often something that we develop over time through advocacy. As we do analysis, we find out that we lack access to certain data, and we engage with counterparts and colleagues to try to retrieve better and more data. Equity budget analysis can be highly effective without using all of the analytical examples given before or included in the toolkit. Just looking at trends over time, what similar or what neighboring countries or similar regions are doing, and using simple ranking can send very strong signals about performance. So even though we do list a number of options in the toolkit, this is also a progression. We should start simple, build on our strengths, and then as time passes and we have greater capacity, we will include more and more complex elements. Good. And just, again, use your strengths. Even though we focus a lot on education in this next presentation and the case, if you have a strong presence in health and nutrition, that's probably the best place to start. And with those few words, we'd like to hand over to Save the Children Cambodia, who will tell us about the experiences in equity budget analysis. And we have a question. Maybe can we just, I would like see that from Lena. If government data is not available, can we use UN data, World Bank data, or do we only use government data? Good question. We often find ourselves comparing government data to UN data, World Bank data, and of course our own data. In order to use it for advocacy in this sort of analysis, we often require the data to be accepted by government. So they need to recognize that this data is relevant for them. We also need the data to be broken down by subnational structure, and often UN data and World Bank data is more general. It's often more at the national level. But there's no limitations such as saying we can only use official government data. If we have other valid, broadly recognized data, we can use that as well. Good. Sophia, are you with us? I can see you on mute.
Yeah, I'm with you. I put on mute.
Good.
Well,
Okay,
because
it's so good
we
to
still
have you on board.
we're still looking for another question before handing to me.
No, Sophia, you can go ahead.
Okay, good. So hi everyone. Greeting from Cambodia. I'm Super. I think some of you might know me. I'm investment and children advisor. So yeah, as Michael mentioned earlier, that Save the Children in Cambodia is not in the pilot country, but we have touched some of the tool already. So let me give an overview of that. Some of you might know that Cambodia is a high-grown economic country, and who has recently achieved lower middle income status. And however, the growth is not well distributed, and there are still a large group of deprived people, particularly children, especially girls, who rely on the public investment for their rights. And Save the Children have been involved in budget analysis and budget advocacy for several years, and we have joined conduct a number of study on budget analysis and also do a lot of advocacy with the governments, with join our counterpart with NGO platform. However, most of our analysis work was driven by consultant and TA due to the limitation of the capacity of our members and lack of analytical framework or system or tool that we can use regularly. Yeah, as experience, budget analysis has historically been tied to education and linked to integrated social accountability framework that Save the Children is implemented. I think some of you might hear about that, but I would like to highlight that social accountability framework is a huge program in of Cambodia, which is the joint effort by the government, which we call supply side, and the CSO, which is demand side, to promote a quality of local service delivery. Particularly, we focus on primary school, health center, and commune administrative service. And we got fund from World Bank, and also our Save Children Norway, Save Children Hong Kong, and Save the Children Sweden. However, we still have a big challenge in our Cambodian context to implement our child rights policy and program due to the, like I said, the not fair share the resource. I mean, the resource allocation for social ministry, such as Ministry of Education, Youth and Sport, Ministry of Health, and Ministry of Social Affairs, still very limited. Next slide, please. Okay, in terms of capacity building, one of the core objectives for Save the Children, especially for investment in children work, is to improve local capacity to conduct regular budget analysis. We are not only working with the local partners, but we also work closely with other networks at the national level, including the international NGO. However, as mentioned earlier, it has been a weakness that the previous budget analysis have been driven by external consultant and TA, and the system to conduct regular budget analysis have been lacking. And yeah, and we find it's very challenging when we want to come up with a policy brief or budget brief to advocate with the governments of Cambodia. And that's why recently I mean, Save the Children Cambodia have been working closely with other CSO, around 15 partners, to conduct equity budget analysis. And our partner, in not just only the CSO, we have INGO, we have local NGO, we have a platform, I mean the network like here we have budget working group, where is the group of NGO working on budget together, around 10 NGO, and we also include the governments, what we call national commissions on decentralization and concentration as well. So we have both CSO and the government joint effort together to develop a tool and to analyze this together. Can we move to the next, please? Yeah, I would like to talk a bit more about our scope and our focus for equity budget analysis. Yeah, as I said earlier, that we are not looking at only at the subnational level, but we're working both at national and subnational. So our scope of work is to target national budgets and also look at the subnational budget. At subnational budget, we focus on the communes. And we also have a close look at 4 main provinces that we implement ISAF, what we call Krati, Reveng, Posat, and Tebong, and around 100 commune with these four provinces. And our approach is to establish 3 systems. So one system at the national level, which is focused mainly on education, and another system is at the local level, or in Cambodia we call commune levels, where we use the commune investment plan and commune budget, and we focus on social service. And the last one, we focus on the analysis of joint accountability action plan, which is the joint efforts or joint plan between service provider and the citizen through the social accountability framework, to understand how the agreement made under this framework lead to priority in the commune investment plan and commune budget, to make sure that the commune really put effort and put the budget to implement that joint action plan. Next, please. Okay, slide 24, I got there. So, as mentioned earlier, that we have 3 layers. So we have education budget database coming from the workshop that we conduct early April. With we have around 2,500 lines of budget data, and we have 300 lines of the education outcome data, just only in 2 days, with our fully participating from different CSO with different skill set. And the data was captured the information from 2010 to 2013 and 2015 to 2017, and also look at the social outcome data from 2015 to 2016. We still waiting for the national statistic of education 2017 to enter more in this database actually. And at the commune database, we have established in late April, the same, just past last month, and we target only 4 communes over the period 2013 to 2017, and we use 2 main resources. One is commune investment plan, and we also look at the commune budgets to compare with each other, and we have around 300 lines of data. And for this level, we find a bit challenge because there is a big gap in social outcome data, so we could not find it exactly to compare with the budget. But we try to look at the result of JAP, Joint Accountability Action Plan instead. The last one is Joint Accountability Action Plan database. So in Cambodia, we have 5 national NGO who implement the social accountability framework, which cover around 54 districts out of 150, something like that. So, but in the workshop, in the database, we target, we pilot with only 6 provinces, around 200 communes, and the gap that we put is in the social sector around 3,500 lines of data. The action plan in the gap to compare to the budget. Next slide, please. Okay, here I just would like to share with you some findings that we have done with education, especially. So you can see that Cambodia economic growth is very fast from year to year, but the investment in social sector investment in social sector or the social sector expenditure is keep stable. Is around 25%. You can look at the yellow one. So the budget increased, but the investment for the social sector still remain the same. So that is one of the key findings for us, and we would put more effort to do more advocate with the government on this area as well. Next slide, please. All right. Here you can see the table of the education budget. So the education spending has increased, hugely increased, 53% from 2015 to 2017. Where the expense only grown by 32% in the same periods. And this has also resulted in education spending increase from 10.8% to 12.3% of the total expenditures of the government. However, the large part of the increased budget spent much on the salary. You can see here the salary is around 78% for the budget allocation for educations. So, of course, salary increasing for education sector is very important, but in the coming year, it is very important to prioritize non-salary spending as well, including operational costs, education infrastructure, and teacher methodology, and so on. This is really the need that we got from the workshop and would become the advocacy point for us. And if we look closely to the provincial level, we can see higher than that. So the salary proportion is around 86% at the provincial level. So it's very high compared to the total education budgets. Next slide, please. Okay, now I'm slide 27. So, while there is an increasing, impressively growth in allocation budget expense, but it's still far behind the government target, because our government is target to reach 20% of the total budgets for education, actually. And our minister said that they have invested around 18.3% of the total budget in education. But from our analysis, it can be true if we take out, if we take out the capital expenditures. What I mean here, I'll try to explain in this way. Our minister said that they have invested 80.3% of the budget in education. But this percentage is not include the capital expenditures. So if we include the capital expenditures, the budget allocation for education stand only 12.3%, which is far behind their target and also far behind our neighboring countries like Thailand and Vietnam. They almost close to 20% of their total budget for education already. So this is another aspect that we analyze and compare to our neighboring and to our to their target set.
So next slide, please. Just come in with a short comment on this one as well. And thank you so much for your presentation. I know this can get a bit technical, but what we found out through our computing and analyzing the numbers is that government uses an alternative basis for calculation when they are comparing with other countries, not what we say the international standard. About 40% of the budget in Cambodia goes into capital investments, infrastructure, roads, airports, all sorts of things, also a bit for social sectors. But when they calculate how much is spent in education, they take out all of the capital. That's why on the left side of this slide, we see education as a percentage of expenditure at 18.3%. When we look at the right side and we include all of it, we also include the capital investments. It reduces to 12.3. So, say for communication purposes, the government of Cambodia have chosen a way of calculation that shows them to be close to the target that they have agreed to. But of course, as a CSO with an interest in this, we are also keen to keep them accountable for reaching the 20% of the full budget and not just the recurrent expenditure. So just a few more words on this important finding, which can be a bit technical. So please, Sophia, carry on.
Yeah, thank Michael for clarifying it. It's very technical aspect. I find it difficult to explain as well. Thank Michael again. Can we move to the next slide? In the previous slide, it's about budget analysis. I mean, a kind of like classic budget analysis. But for this slide, we try to compare the budget analysis with the social outcome. So you can see the table here. We have the budget from education, and we also look at the social outcome at the, especially at the completion rate of primaries and secondary school. So our tool is try to look at both and compare with each other, and we find it's a very interesting finding. Can we move to slide? Next slide, please. I will show the tables. It's more, easier. You can see the ranking that we put based on the compare between budget and the outcome. So we try to rank our 25 provinces, and we look at the budget allocation for education sector in each province, and we look at the completion rates. So we got number one with Bong Khmum, that they have allocated 64.1% of their provincial budget to education sectors. And they got a very high result as well. So the completion rate is around 83.1%. While Thailand, I mean the last Thailand, the 25th rank, they allocate only 30.5% of their provincial budget for education, and as the result, they come up with only 60.8 completion rate. So here, the table here is clearly shown that the budget allocation is really linked to the result outcome. The more budget that they invest in education by province, the more result completion rate is better. This is what I really want to highlight from our findings work. Can we move to the next, please? Yeah, lessons learned. I think Michael have touched on the first point already. Access data is a key challenge. Data is not easy to access it. Actually, it have to build from our advocacy work and our trust with the government. However, when we got the data itself also have problem. I mean, the accuracy of the information still an issue. Especially we did in at the commune level, we found it very challenging while we could not read the data and the data is not accurate for us to enter. Yeah, and another one is access to gender separate data still is an issue. We could not see how much money they allocate for as boys or girls specifically. So it's hard for us for our every last campaign to look at that one. But we try to capture those information. And another point is about discipline. It's really important. Capturing data is not taking long time, but discipline is really a basic need. Because, for example, we spend only 2 days, but we capture 1,000 data. But to make sure that the data is accurate and correct, we need a strong discipline with our participants actually. And another one is about partnership. We have to include different NGOs and government into that, and also we have to include our colleagues from different skill set as well, not just only education or health, but we also have other like advocacy people, male people, and people at the ground who know more about what is going on. So experience show that it's really important to have a different skill set in our design. And also very important to have the owner of the data set, because now we have developed the data system, database, but the question, who is the owner? And in Cambodia, we decide to use budget working group, who is the platform where we work on budget, to own this data, and then we want to have it online as well. Next, please, for my last slide. Yeah, for the next step, we might need to do more, but with less input or less assistance from our TA. So we need to capture more information, especially the social outcome for education 2017, and we might need to add more information that we get like the budget information 2014 or budget information referred to the capital investment 2010 to 2013 in our data set. And we also need to work more with other sectors like health, so we might need some more technical assistance from our TA on that as well. And the last one is how we use the information for advocacy. So now we are working a lot in using the budget brief to advocate with the governments. Thank everyone.
Okay, thank you so much, Subiak, for this presentation. I know it's a lot of learning that we are trying to include in few slides and use examples. So I'm sure that there are certain things that we have missed out on. In a few minutes, we will hear from our colleagues in the ISARO Regional and Multi-Country Program Unit, who will just briefly tell us about their experiences and set up some of this work. I think we'll also mention, it might answer one or two questions that's been put in the chat box. But thank you, Subiak, for that great presentation. I'm sure that we will get some questions on how this was done. I think there's also some reservations about using complex calculation methods and computing a lot of data. And it's very good that you can share that That is not necessarily the biggest constraint. It's more about accessing the right documents and making sure that we're disciplined in the way that we work with data.
Yeah.
But I would like to hear Yvonne from ISARO. Are you available?
Hi, Michael.
Hey, June. Listen, we're going to go on mute now, and then we will change the slide to slide 32, and maybe you can add a few words to your experiences being part of the pilot of the Fair Financing Toolkit.
Hi, everyone. My name is June. I'm sitting at the East and Southern Africa Regional Office, part of the regional and multi-country program unit. We were part of the equity budget analysis pilot, and the pilot currently is ongoing. We are still continuing with the activity, but sorry, can you hear me?
Junie, would help if you came closer to the microphone.
Okay.
Thank you.
Is that better now?
Yes, it is. Thank you.
Okay. Okay, so I'll just begin. I'll begin again. My name is June from the Regional Multi-Country Program Unit, which is based in Nairobi at the SRO office. The RMCPU was part of the equity budget analysis pilot, and currently we are still continuing with the pilot. The activity is still ongoing. So I'll just give a brief overview of what we are working on, and we anticipate that we will be done at least by June. So what we'll be working on is an IT tool, which is essentially a regional framework that allows for computation and continued analysis of government resource allocations to child-focused sectors. So the tool will essentially enable CSOs and country offices within the region to analyze data which will be used to advocate for improving and increasing resource flows in child-focused sectors, and to identify relevant. Sorry, I hope everyone can hear.
Yes, we can hear you, June. Please go on.
Okay. Okay. So the tool will be used to identify relevant advocacy points based on comparisons between countries, and between national and subnational level data, between sectors, for example, health, education, and also between subsectors, that is education, for example, in education, looking at how much is allocated to primary education versus secondary or tertiary education. So essentially the tool will allow for easy computation, analysis, and comparison between countries, and will assist country officers as well as civil societies to be able to do their own computation in terms of equity budget analysis. So what we are aiming at is to eliminate CSO and country office dependence on consultants to do equity budget analysis. The tool will also be strongly linked to social accountability aspect, where we'll be able to analyze data on service delivery in regards to the amount allocated to specific sectors, and particularly child-focused sectors. Yeah, so we just had some minor bumps along the way. So one of our key challenges, by now we actually should have had the tool ready, but one of the challenges that we faced is identifying and a partner who was able to work on budget advocacy at a regional level. But we have currently managed to engage a partner called the Parliamentary Support Trust, who specialize on budget advocacy and social accountability, and we'll be working with them on the next phase of this project. So currently we are finalizing on describing the database that will be used to develop the IT tool, as well as finalizing on agreements with the partner. So it's just a short overview, and we hope that we'll be able to share the tool more widely once we finalize with it. Thanks. Over to you, Michael.
And thank you so much, June. I'm really pleased that the work is going forward, even though we've had a few bumps along the way, as you correctly said. And I think it will be of great benefit to other countries in the region and to the whole Save the Children's family when we get this up and running, because it will really allow us to have a tool where we can enter data and do analysis both within countries and across countries. So really looking forward to following the work. We should go to question and answers, and I noticed that Camille next to me has been noting a number of different questions that we can start with. Otherwise, I think you're welcome to use the chat box to state your question, and we might call to you to give her a bit more information on your question. But Camille, could you share a question?
Yes, please use the chat box if you have additional questions. So we have first a question from Marine. Marine, who was interested in looking at the composition of the revenue, but who asked specifically which countries we have done the analysis in, and do we have anything on aggregate numbers. So June has partly answered this question. Michael, you want to take this one first?
Yes. On revenue, there has been work done. I think maybe we could hear more about some of the work from Tax Justice Africa that June can tell us a bit about. But I would like to share a few of my own experiences working, for example, in Cambodia in some of our earlier work. We did look at revenue, but our approach to revenue was more on the aid dependency in the social sectors. So it was looking at development partner contributions in the social sectors and how also communities are financing a significant part of service delivery. So it wasn't so much a clear-cut look at how revenue is raised, but also looking at the revenue side, in particularly into social services. And we did similar work a couple of years back in Myanmar, also looking at the composition of revenue and aid dependency. June, do you have more on some of the experiences possibly from Tax Justice Africa?
Experiences in regards to revenue advocacy? Sorry?
Yes.
With Tax Justice Network Africa, currently we've really begun with building of capacity because, okay, there's a lot of capacity gaps in terms of CSOs engaging, particularly with tax and or budget advocacy. So we have developed a tax and child rights guide, which enables CSOs to debate or better advocate with the more technical aspects of tax. The Tax and Child Rights Guide has been shared on the CIG Resource Center. We also work with Tax Justice Network Africa on an analysis on the missed opportunities in taxation in 3 different countries in East and Southern Africa, including West Africa. So that's Kenya, Zambia, and Sierra Leone. So at the moment, we have various projects in the works. So we want to engage more with the African Committee of Experts on the Rights and Welfare of the Child, so that their recommendations include recommendations to state parties to increase revenue mobilization. We have various research projects in the region, which includes research on the extractive industry and the amount of tax that we're losing in the extractive industry and the horticultural industry as well, which are major industries in the region. And And we also have an annual training for CSOs ongoing on tax issues. So we have a number of projects in the works in terms of revenue allocation.
Thank you, Jules. And Lena is adding that she has shared the tax and child rights guide both on the CRG Workplace page and on the CRG Resource Center, and also together with the Fair Finance Working Group. Marine had an additional question on inequality and why we are using the Gini coefficient and not the Palmer. Michael, you want to take this one?
Yes. Mentioning the Gini coefficient in the toolkit is one option among others. I would also say with much of the work we do, it's maybe one of the more mature options when we start with something more simple, and then we try to get data on, for example, to measure the Gini coefficient or the Palmer. I think particularly in our dialogue with other CSOs and with government, we need to use something which is well known. If we start to bring in terminology that is not well established in the context, it can be difficult to have the discussion on those points. So it's a balance where we add new elements, and we often do that together with government to calculate, and then we find out what that information shows us, and we use that for advocacy moving on. But we could certainly use the Palmer. We could also use other methods, as long as our data set is structured in the right way.
Thanks, Michael. Marine had a subsequent question on social sectors, tax and aid dependency, whether there are any trends that you can foresee, which resources is best for social sectors, if social services are better in less aid-dependent countries.
It's such an interesting dialogue. I don't think there's a simple question. One of the challenges that are in Cambodia is that many donors are looking to reduce their commitment to supporting Cambodia. And that's because Cambodia has reached lower middle income status, as have many countries in Africa. So we're looking at many of the huge support programs in Cambodia. It's about 40% of the public budget that comes from, it's closer to 30 now, but it's still a very significant part. It's mostly to the social sectors, and as donors start to reduce their commitment, there'll be a huge need for government to take over and increase domestic funding. So it's a big challenge. I'm not sure whether or not we can say which is better. You say domestic funding is more stable in the long run, but of course development partner contributions do give a huge boost to social sector delivery in many areas of the world. But it's certainly a discussion I would like to continue.
Thank you, Michael. We had a question from Claire Blanchard, who has left us on further socialization of the Fair Finance Analysis toolkit, and specifically whether the tools were going to be available in other languages. Lene, do you have any information on what is going to happen after the pilot ends?
I can only say that, the budget was not what we had suggested, so I guess all of us in this trying to improve the analytical capacity have been reduced in our budgets. So there's no money for it right now, but obviously when the pilots are done and we have had another round of comments and updating and finalizing the tool, we need to think about that and see if we can find a member who is willing to sponsor us on that, or whether we can dig deep in our own little CRT core budget and find the money. It would be very useful, of course, to have it translated, but I can't promise because we simply don't have the money right now. So we would need to look for that. I don't know if you have anything to add, Mulu, if you think there will be another round of or another pot of money for translation or anything.
Hi. Well, that is uncertain. Thanks, Lena. In 2018, we certainly will put a budget request, but as you know, we're not sure whether the Strategy Investment Fund will continue at the same level or not. And I think one thing I was also I said, and I don't know if my chat box was working, was, you know, how do we look at opportunities like members, as you mentioned, Lena, and also current programs. I believe Cambodia did it on their own because their intervention focuses on that. So the question I had was, how do we have actually a mapping of the programs that are currently looking into this that could apply outright this tool in their current program? I think that's probably the low-hanging fruit that we have in 2017. But obviously 2018, we'll have to try and see how this works. And in relation to this, I think if I may ask a question, a general question which will also link to how do we get this, how do we get other opportunities leveraged, is that, as you know, the World Bank and other donors, our major donors like the UK aid, the DFID, the Norwegian government, are involved in this public expenditure and accountability initiative. And they lead these public expenditure reviews in many countries. I've not been involved in this for a long time now. I'm just remembering from my days when I used to work for USAID. But this is I'm wondering, like, what kind of involvement we have at that level beyond the CSOs, and are we at the table in those kind of discussions at the national level to bring in our tool and influence the process there, bringing the child lens, if you will, to try and when they do public expenditure reviews?
Michael, do you have any insight on Mulu's question on whether we have any leverages at global level around expenditure review? And together, are we sitting together with the World Bank, DFID, NORAD, and other?
I think it varies from situation to situation. That in some countries we do have a presence in those forums, and in other countries we do not. I think as a CSO we would often rely on someone to invite us in. We might not be born members of those groups, so possibly UNICEF, for example, or UNDP could be good partners to invite us into those forums. In some countries we're part of it, and in others we're not. I would lean towards that in most countries we're not a part of those discussions, but in certain other countries we are.
Thanks, Michael. And Marine is adding that yes, we're really involved at the UK level in reviews and influencing of DFID and other UK departments. Thank you for that, Marine. I will move on. We had a question from Suzanne on the use of the databases, whether they are managed by a database expert or whether we are relying on technical assistance. Michael, can you answer this one?
Yes.
Michael?
One of the objectives of this work have been to reduce the dependency on external consultants and TA, and enable CSOs and staff to conduct analysis on their own. Now, I think we're taking some very important steps in that direction. It still requires, because we're using an Excel-based system, Excel-based database, that we need someone who is competent in using those systems. That does not necessarily require a database expert. It requires someone who is skilled in Excel. And we've been happy to learn that many of, for example, of our meal colleagues are actually quite good in using different Excel systems and found it very easy to assist us in setting up the database. So we do require skills in that regard, but I don't think we require a database expert to maintain the system.
Yeah, may I jump in a bit, Michael?
Of course.
Yeah, I agree with Michael that we might not need more assistance from the TA on the about expert on database. Like what we have in Cambodia, we hand this over to a budget working group, and especially to the NGO forum, and they have many people who might be good at using the database, so they can work it well. And even in Save the Children, I think the Bill team also good at keeping the system work well with less support from the TA. I have a strong confidence on that.
Thanks, Sophia. And if you stay on the line, there was 3 questions for you from Ashik in Bangladesh. The first one is saying that from the table, it looks like education outcomes are not really linked to budget allocation. Did we look at any other relevant information, such as provincial income level or other socioeconomic indicators? The second question is whether Cambodia, do you have geographically disaggregated budget data available in their entirety, and whether how inclusion of capital expenditure reduced as compared to total education allocation?
Okay, I will try to answer the 2 top questions, and the last one I might need assistance from Michael to explain clearer than me, I think. So the first question is, yeah, of course, I think you have a good reflections. Actually, we also had a discussion about that, and there might be another factor that influence to the relationship between budget and the outcome. And if you look at the table, you can see Phnom Penh capital, for example, they allocate only 33.3% of the total budget of the province, but they get a very high completion rate. And there might be another factor, like in Phnom Penh they have a lot of private primary school or private school for children, so they do not need to invest more. And yeah, there might be another factor of NGO support in some province that cause the government try to draw back their money to invest in other area. So of course you're right, I think, but at that time we just only have that information about the completion rate, and we do not have another information, but we put a lot of question on that. And for question number 2, yeah, in Cambodia we have a budget book which separate by province. Yeah, so we can see all the information by each province, by ministry, and also the commune level as well, and district and commune level. So it is available in the governments, but it's hard to get those information as well, I can say that. And for the last question, I think, Michael, can you give more clarification on that? I think you might make clearer than me. Michael?
I'm here. I'm talking into a mute microphone. Sorry for that. Maybe just a few more comments on question number 2. So yes, we have geographically disaggregated budget data following the government structure of national government, provincial government, and we can also get data on commune level. Now, to the integrity of the structure, there's still certain question marks. For example, it's difficult for us to obtain the detail from provincial level to commune level. So it's a bit of a black box for us on how the provincial budget is actually allocated to the communes. At the national level, we can see clear links from national to provincial level within each of the functional areas, but we can't see it from provincial to commune level. So it is geographically disaggregated, but it might not have the full integrity that we would like at this point. Yes, please, Sophia.
Actually, they have a separate book for the commune budget, not in the provincial budget. So they have different lines for that.
Yeah, so there's an issue about what we might call connectivity in budget data from commune to provincial level, which is something that I'm quite certain will improve in the coming years. But at this point, it's hard to make a very strict comparison. Maybe just one more comment on question 1 as well. We look at other relevant information. I think that's the aim of what we're doing now. We want to include more information, as Sopiak also mentioned. We haven't had time to do all of that because we only started this work or the computation or capturing of information recently, and we had 3 databases to build, but we're certainly open for it, and I think we need to do that. Both include other socioeconomic indicators, other socioeconomic data, and to analyze with our thematic colleagues as well. And the third question, I think we might have explained something not quite right, because what happened is that it's not that the inclusion of capital expenditure reduced the total education allocation. In absolute numbers, the allocation to education increases when we include capital, but the proportion of education in the government budget falls when we include capital expenditure.
But isn't the capital expenditure related to the education sector?
There is only, out of the, 7.3 trillion allocated to capital expenditure or capital investment, I think it's about like 100 million going into education. So the proportion of education within the capital investment is very, very low. But maybe, Iqbal, I could also show you some of the calculations.
Perfect. And then we have one last question from Jasminka. Jasminka suggested we are organizing a meeting supporting countries to utilize the tools effectively for advocacy to support the absolute beginners. Michael, you have something to say on that? Or maybe Lena? Or maybe Mulu?
Yeah, I can say that that we are organizing a global meeting on public investment in children this year, which is only for people who have good experience on this, because we need to use it to look at our evidence so far and also to pull together a common approach on public investment in children. But Shamila and I are just considering whether we should add a 1 or 2 day training to this meeting, because many of the people who would be in the room would probably be interested in this, and then others could fly into this meeting for that training. So we will consider if we can manage to do that, if we can find somebody to facilitate the training, if we have the funds to pay for it and all of that, but we will definitely consider it. And so great that there's great interest in these tools. And of course, we'll also talk with our colleagues in child poverty about whether they could train on the cost barrier tool. So we had the full toolkit training in the same 2 days. So we'll definitely consider that.
Thank you, Lena. I think I have addressed all questions. Thank you for this very fruitful Q&A session. And we are close to the end of the webinar. I just want to talk to you briefly about the learning strategy that we have applied to the Fair Finance analysis project or pilot project. So as you all know, this is a pilot project where 4 active countries or regions are participating in the learning process and to feed in the final versions of the toolkit or final version of the toolkit. So in developing our learning methodologies, we wanted to support the project teams to document and share the knowledge on the application of the tools, including reflecting on successes and areas of improvement. So we have put together and we have proposed 4 very simple tools for countries to use and regions to use to improve our learning and feed into the final toolkit version, namely the Fair Finance Analysis Pre- and Post-Assessment Questionnaire, Fair Finance Project Journal, a feedback form, and Lessons Learned workshop. In terms of the pre- and post Fair Finance Analysis Assessment Questionnaire, so the pre-assessment questionnaire was administered at the beginning, at the onset of the Fair Finance Analysis Toolkit development to countries participating in the toolkit development and pilot. So that's 22 participants in total. We had 17 responses showcasing the following. the knowledge on the fair finance guarantee of the Every Last Child campaign of Save the Children was good. There was also some knowledge on how governments finance public investments in children. However, the knowledge and the confidence to conduct or coordinate fair finance analysis was limited or low. There was very limited exposure and confidence in analysis and interpretation of budgets from an equity perspective, and very limited knowledge on tools and methodologies to assess equity of budgets. So we will administer this a similar questionnaire at the end of the pilot phase to assess whether there were any positive changes in the competencies, in the knowledge and the confidence of the pilot and the project participant in terms of using the toolkit and conducting this fair financing analysis. In terms of the project journal, so we have come together, we have put together a very simple day-to-day feedback tool to make sure we record, we document day-to-day learning on the use, on the application of the tools. The categories that can be considered in the journal can include overall coordination, resource time management, technical support from us, the steering group, training, data collection, data review and analysis, quality management, application of analysis findings, or specific feedback on the tools themselves. You have an extract here of the project journal just to show to you what it looks like and how it could be useful in documenting day-to-day learning. We have also put together a feedback form to be administered to all, or a sample of training, workshop, interview, survey, or discussion participants, so basically the analysis stakeholders, to obtain their feedback on the organization, on the content and results of the analysis activity, which can help us get additional insights into the competencies, knowledge, and confidence of the children's staff and partner conducting the analysis work. You have an example of a question here on how the activity participant would rate the moderator's knowledge on a specific subject matter. Finally, we are very, very strongly encouraging participating countries, but also other countries interested in using this toolkit to conduct a lessons learned workshop at the end of the analysis work, just to reflect on the analysis work that was done, the quality of the analysis, and the use of the findings, with the hope to improve subsequent analysis work. As part of the Fair Finance for Children analysis pilot, we will have a workshop before we finalize the toolkit, which will have a session on learning and lessons learned. But we very strongly encourage countries that are interested in using the toolkit to also conduct this lessons learned workshop at the end of the analysis work. On this note, I would like to thank you very much for your active participation in this webinar. I would like to thank Sophia from Save the Children Cambodia for his excellent presentation. I would like to thank Michael, Lene, and all my colleagues at the Child Rights Governance Global Theme for the wonderful support in this webinar. Thank you also to June from the SRO region for her contribution and to help us showcase the work that is being done, the pilot work that's being done in the SRO on the equity budget analysis. Michael, you want to say a closing note?
Well, I would like to echo the thanks to all participants, particularly Sopiak to be part of this presentation and share all the learning from Cambodia. I think that such a rich discussion afterwards in the Q&A with interesting points coming up, and I hope that we can find a way to take much of the advice forward and find out how we continue this work. I should also like to remind you that next week we have the third webinar on political economy analysis. We'll hear about the case from Zimbabwe. I'm really looking forward to that and hope that several of you will also have interest in participating in that. So thank you so much.
Thank you. We will share the recording of this webinar and talk to you next week for the political economy analysis webinar. Thank you all. Goodbye.